Well, hello everyone. My name is Gabriel Gonzales. I work with Next System Studies at George Mason University, and of course with Next System Teach-ins as well. So we've gone over now, the moment that we're in, the context, and the role we want higher education to play in this time of crisis, but also of opportunity. Then following that, we got into the more concrete questions looking at how to actually organize a teach-in, what that will look like pedagogically, and also in terms of its physical makeup, who's actually going to be involved in that process. And now finally, introducing our final topic, how to build meaningful mass participation, expanding beyond the confines of your local college campus and start to think locally, transnationally, all that. So enough of me. Let me introduce our three wonderful panelists, saving the best for last. So we have Lizah Makombore from the University of Vermont, Suren Moodliar with Encuentro Cinco, and Dr. Deissy Perilla, collaborator with Leadership for the Ecozoic. So Lizah, you are first.
Okay. Are we all set? My presentation looks good. Gabriel?
Yeah, it all looks good.
Okay,
Good to go.
awesome. So I know I've got 6 minutes. Let me time myself because I'm one of those people who ramble a little bit. So if I have a timer also on my side, that would help. Sorry. Yeah, 5 minutes. Let's go. Okay, so a little bit about myself, just to also then give context to this presentation where we're trying to answer the broad question around building meaningful mass participation and how to build your local teaching coalition. So for me, I'm originally from South Africa. I was born in Zimbabwe, but I've lived the longest of my life in South Africa, and also had an opportunity to participate in sort of post democratic South Africa. So for me, I was trying to broadly, define or find some form of definition of what do we mean by building community for the next system. And I couldn't settle for just one word, like it's a process or it's a practice or it's an institution. But I think building community for the next system involves all of those concepts around it is a process, it is about practice, it is an institution of fostering cooperation, collective action, and solidarity through shared values, shared vision, principles, and collaborative structures that support the emergence of a future-orientated social, economic, political, and ecological crisis. So to this, I really wanted to talk about how the building of the community part of it, whatever it is, or, a collage of all those words I've spoken about, it is really rooted in a shared vision and values. So having said that, I also wanted to highlight how, for me, shared vision is really critical, and it's the foundation of how then you go about building this community for the next system. So I will raise questions around visioning, and quoting Donella Meadows, I think again in the 1980s. I think I'm stuck in the 1980s, and you see why a little later on. Is that people don't like visioning. People are not comfortable in thinking about the future. I think that's why we struggle a lot with sustainability and achieving that. So I speak a lot about visioning, and also values for me is very critical, because coming from like a Southern African context. We have an African cosmology, and I think it's time that we look to these cosmologies that have been left in the peripherals, like Ubuntu. Ubuntu is summed up in a phrase which says, "I am because we are." So it centers community well-being, it centers solidarity, it centers forgiveness, love, thy neighbor. I think in the previous uh, uh, panel, they spoke a lot about neighbor and, checking up on each other and those sort of empathetic values, reciprocity, and so on. So for me, that was sort of the definition. And I'm trying to move to the next slide quickly. This is a model that I wanted to talk about for me, which the UDF, for those who don't know, is the United Democratic Front. It was a coalition of anti-apartheid structures in South Africa. And what I wanted to highlight here is how this coalition really we see throughout the history of sort of the 1980s in South Africa, really bringing in the systematic change that South Africans were looking for at that time. And here I wanted to just highlight what Professor Gertrude Fester said, and just read this definition to show you people can read, to just illustrate how community building brings about, a lot of contradictions. So here, Professor Gertrude speaks about how people were converging as capitalist, communist, the contradictions of bringing people with divergent and sometimes convergent perspectives. So thinking about community building in a space that allows for divergence and convergence at the same time. And also here, I wanted to say this model has been successful. We see an apartheid coalition really spreading out throughout South Africa. The teachings were done everywhere and so on. So having said that, I wanted to raise how would this model work in today's generation, considering misinformation, considering, fascist governments, considering all these factors that we are facing in the crisis. So I'll leave it there. Thank you. I'll raise my questions later. Thanks, Gabriel.
All right. Thank you, Liza. Thank you. All right. So now we'll move on to Suren.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for reminding me of that fact. I've also been asked to start my video. Okay. What? Strange, I was working as a webmaster for this program and got it right, I think, for the most part, except on my own talk. So I apologize for that. I have a slide presentation that is going to be quite long, but hopefully very quick. I will also address some of the questions that Lizah addressed, but instead of looking at the big picture, look at the more micro elements of it. So thank you for joining the conversation. My name is Suren Moodliar. I'm going to take about 6 to 7 minutes of your time to address campus organizing from the point of view of undergraduate organizers. I should add that even though the university and higher education in general are in the crosshairs of the new regime, free speech gains are being rolled back. I'm nonetheless going to focus on organizing to build power for social change on the campuses. Okay. So again, from the point of view of undergraduate organizers. Okay. So I'm going to do this across 5 topics: getting started on campus, mapping the campus, understanding the audiences, breaking down the walls, and ask at the end, what does this mean for the next system? So fairly straightforward, common sense kind of approach. And as you know, common sense often masks a whole lot. So let me get going on this. Okay, getting started on campus. I should... One fundamental element about getting started on campus is to recognize that the campus is the real world. Even though it is an ivory tower, it's not merely an ivory tower. It's an economic actor, a political player, an ideological actor. More common sense thing about campuses are that they're knowledge producers. As such, they have a lot of symbolic power. They employ academic labor and they do cutting edge research. As an employer, though, it is part of the gig economy in some places, and that gig economy is part of another picture, the idea of the core and ring of the employment sectors. So I'll just get ahead and say a bit more about this. So I began to map the campus a bit. And I tried to look at the different sectors, and I produced this diagram after a lot of tries. Then I realized I'm not going to be able to capture the dynamism, and yet I'm going to do a common sense map. And this is what I came up with. 15 sectors, and this could be broken down into a whole lot more, right? We could, for example, for each of the 15 sectors that I've just identified, map race, class, gender, sexuality onto all these centers. We could also add 21st century disciplines and be wary of the challenges that Stephanie Luce and Bethany Letake warned of earlier today. Often when we think of these fundamental cleavages and transcendental categories like race, class, and gender, we miss some of the immediate challenges. And so my presentation in terms of the mapping and this, what I'm calling a common sense approach, is to identify some of the immediate challenges for each of these different sectors. Right? We want to understand each audience, but then we want to recognize that each of these audiences have their own calendars, they have their different budgets, and they have different logics. Right. In addition to that, they have different accountability mechanisms and traditions. So how does somebody who's an undergraduate student coming onto campus make sense of this bewildering array of all of these things, not to mention the big challenges that have been discussed in the last two presentations? I would argue, and it's also not a very original argument, that we can only learn about these many determinative dimensions and sectors if we've been around for a long time, right? So where does this leave students who have not been around for a long time, right? We can build relationships for those people who likely have been around for a long time, staff, unions, progressive faculty, as well as all of the other elements. So how do we do this? We do this by breaking down the walls, and I want to argue that this can only happen by both forums, public ones, but also, more importantly, by deliberate one-on-one conversations where we learn the history, we find out who influences whom, who cannot work with whom, and that's a reality. We learn from others what they want to achieve and learn their dreams and unrealized goals. Once we are able to have these conversations, one-on-ones and more public fora, we can then ask each other, what can we offer each other, right? And I think that's really critical to doing this work. Okay, and our goal for these conversations, by asking these questions, is to share knowledge with each other, but recognize that we are in a new, more repressive era. I'd like to go on to the next slide. And I don't think I need to say more about that, except that we have done a lot of work over the last few decades into what constitutes, mutual care, safety, and also security culture. All of these things come in, but they should never obstruct what I consider the basic goal: to share knowledge with each other and build a global imagination with regard to what's possible when we work together. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So how do we get started? I will take one example.
There we go. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Whoops. Okay. So in So one of the things I want to say is, if you're a new student on campus, how do we get started, right? If you have a small student group, because, you're sitting in a dorm, you have your friends, but how do we learn more about the campus history? I'd say one place to start is with your county labor federations. To reach them, you can obviously call them up, leave messages, etc. But the most important bridge to them are the local staff unions on campus, and especially if there's already student unions, that's the place to start, right? So you take your unions to the county labor federations, and that allows you to relate to the rest of the labor movement and to also begin to develop an understanding of the unions, factions, and political agendas. Okay, I'm going to move on from there. So if we're able to do this, and I could do this for each one of the 15 sectors, right? I could, go back here. I could have ask these questions for each one of the unions, right? However, I think we're able to ask questions that have implications for the next system, right? If we take into account at least those 15 sectors I mentioned, we can think about the campus food system, the sourcing of the foods, dining halls and community-supported agriculture and local co-ops, right? We can also, in coalition with unions, think about local government elections, union coalitions, how we turn out people, how we develop demands together, right? We can also, the best institutions on campus are the ones that are constantly under attack. Their budgets are being taken away, even if their names remain. So when we collaborate by mapping each other, understanding each other's names, we can build the right kind of coalitions. We can also use the scaffolding of campus academic networks, right, to scale locally, regionally, and globally. You can think of professional associations as providing that scaffolding. We can also think more locally about housing, and then we can think about the public developer model and how it relates to local landlords. Often these are large corporations that are global in nature, but we can also think about the community land trust model and figure out how the universities can add to that. So I just gave these examples as a way to provoke thoughts and questions, right? I'd like to move on then. So with these examples, I'd like you to ask, right, do these examples speak to what I promised in the presentation, which is building power, building community, prefiguring the next system? So just to recap really quickly, I've identified lots of different sectors, common sense things, identified in the example of one case, labor, how we connect to them. And what I've talked about there in terms of building community is it needs to be a structured and strategic process, right? You build it, you don't assume it, right? And so I want you to ask if the examples I presented around the food system, local elections, defending campus institutions, scaling networks, right? Do they speak to building power, building community, to prefiguring the next system? Okay, and this is my info if you want to talk with me later, but with that, I'll hand it back to Gabriel.
Thank you, Suren, your presentation. We'll get to your questions after Daisy's presentation. We can have a more open discussion with all the participants here. So Daisy, go ahead.
Thank you, Gabriel. Can you all see my presentation? The full screen, yeah, right?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Deissy Perilla. I just want to address that I'm currently connecting from Montreal, Canada, but I'm originally from Colombia, South America, born and raised. And this is a place that I've been referring to mainly in this conference. So linking up, that was my assignment for this conference, for this short talk. And I'm also gonna time myself because I tend to talk too much, but yeah, I'm just gonna take 7 minutes of your time. To talk about this linking up, I need to tell you a little story that refers to the way I was connected to the New Systems Initiative. And I'm gonna read my presentation. When I was invited to be part of the Next Systems Initiative, It took me a while to process this concept of next systems. At the beginning, to me, it sounded very much like a futuristic idea for social change and something that implied somehow something new that needed to be created, like to build up what's next, we need to bring something new. But then, after participating in different meetings, I started to understand that these next systems are more an invitation to imagine how the world could look like after capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. A lot of what it was mentioned in these meetings, I knew I've seen it already in South America, in Colombia, the place where I grew up. So I started questioning this idea of the next systems are something new. And I think Ben and I had conversations, and Gabriel, about this idea of new was next. And I started asking myself, maybe these new systems don't have to be, or maybe the next systems don't have to be new systems because they are already present in different corners of the world. And maybe they are not new, but ancestral. Maybe they're not new systems, but survival systems or systems of resilience. In a way, the next systems have different names and faces depending on the geopolitics. But we only call it new, or we connect it to something new because maybe for us it's new as academics, intellectuals, and activists. And then I found myself landing in more questions. Like, where are all these new systems? Where are they? Have the new systems already been present in South America? What do communities call them instead of calling them new systems? What do they look like in places like the Global South? And from a more practical perspective and from the ground perspective, these questions are super relevant in a sense that they become a bridge to me to link, connect, and to build community or mass participation in places that are not the global north. So, hold on. This always happens. I cannot move to the next slide. I don't know why. Okay. So, I think to make that connection, we need to reframe and to be open to talk about other type of systems. Alternative ancestral systems of resilience, survival, and solidarity, where in places where people have overcome social and political struggles like wars, forced displacement, social injustice, and dispossession. The reality is that thousands of communities have been building these new systems for centuries in an attempt to survive, to get their land back, or to demand justice from oppressive institutional systems. My experience in Colombia for over 10 years has been mainly working with these communities recovering from a violent, oppressive system that has wrecked and divided the country for years, but keep building and engaging in solidarity and reconciliation practices within restorative and reparation processes. These communities, along with grassroots activists, keep building or trying to build next systems too. My proposal is for us as a convergence, as a group that is reimagining the next systems and how the teachings in November are going to look like. My proposal is to link up with these communities, to keep building the new systems within the teachings as well. These are some examples of community-based organization fostering collective learning, social transformation, and educational processes for social transformation in Colombia. Yes, these are communities. These communities are victims of oppressive systems, but they are, at the same time, and most importantly, envisioning agents of social change and significant partners within the Next System Alliance, whom we should be linking up with the teachings. These communities master building up next systems. I'm just, since this is an opportunity also to, talk about potential local partners for the event that is going to happen in November. I just want to quickly mention two communities that I've been working for in the past 10 years. One of them is the Embroiderer of Memory, Costurero de la Memoria in Spanish. This is an embroidery, this is a group that practice embroidery as a resilience practice for memory and reparation processes and search for justice. I would I would love to talk about these initiatives more, but for now, I'm just gonna mention them, and we can get back to them in the questions section. And this is another initiative. These are ex-combatants who signed the peace agreement that are now participating in transitional justice processes and in projects to rebuild Colombia's social fabric. This is a very cool initiative called Manifiesta, which proposal is for a sustainable fashion project fostering social reintegration of ex-combatants within the national peace process in Colombia. I'm going to leave it here for now, looking up for the conversation and for the questions. Thank you, Gabriel.
Yep. Thank you, Deissy, for your presentation. So now we're going to move on to a more discussion-oriented portion. Lizah, I know you asked your question in the chat, but do you want to put it in voice for us?
Great. So my question is, how do you, as a potential sort of organizer of the Next System Teaching, envision Next System Teaching coalition? Like, what does that look for you in future? And really, for me, it's in considering, some of the contradictions that we are facing in today's societies, and even the crisis that we have, like massive inequality, like the divergence are just huge, misinformation, disempowering of even labor unions and organizations. So my question really is, how do you envision, what do you see in terms of Next System Teaching coalition? What does that look for you, like when you think about it? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so if anybody has any thoughts or an answer to Lizah's question, you can put it in the chat. If you have a separate question also, put it in the chat. There's also the Q&A feature. You could raise your hand as well. So yeah, and I guess in the meantime, while people think of responses, do Suren, Deissy, do either of you have any thoughts on Lizah's question?
Well, I think it's a great question, of course. I think, I was going to start my presentation actually saying that how important is the way I see this convergence is also as a place to draft the right questions, because I know this is a place to, kind of an invitation to take action. But in order to take action, we also need to frame the right questions and pose the right questions to the right people. So I think that is important. I think this is like at the end, the outcome of this meeting. But to reply to your question, Lizah, I think we should definitely be putting in practice more the theories that we work on as academics. There's been a lot of development, theoretically speaking, but I think praxis is also that is important. From an academic, intellectual perspective, I know higher education is now investing in developing transgressive methodologies. And I think by now we should be more focused on those methods. I think it was Jasmine who spoke on to this topic, how we need to gather, collect, register, process all these initiatives that are building, that have been building new systems for centuries and that we don't know anything about. We need to start implementing these methodologies. And I think, and this is a controversial opinion, but I think we should definitely make pieces with AI. There is a way we can use AI in our favor to collect all these processes, to register, to gather together, to put it in one place, to make it work, to connect, to link. I'm just going to leave it there.
Yeah, and Suren, you can go ahead, but I'll just leave space open for anybody in the chat to share their thoughts or speak to anything. And then Suren, you can go.
Yeah. I think the existence of next system teaching provides a date, a time, and a place to organize around. So it allows you to go and open the conversation with these discrete campus groups, tell them about the next system teaching, discuss with them the possibilities, what we could achieve at these next system teachings, and ask them what they want to achieve. It's the preparatory work leading up to that date, time, and place that's really important, right? Like, Lizah, I think you mentioned the Freedom Charter, Ben did as well. That Freedom Charter, which was adopted in South Africa in 1955, was preceded by organizers going out into the countryside and giving people lists of things to talk about. So I think that by establishing a teaching as a very practical, immediate objective, all the big macro issues we talk about suddenly come together and merge with your local and your day-to-day calendar. And so that's how I see it building. I should say, use this as an opportunity to also correct an egregious omission from my presentation, which was I did not mention adjunct faculty who are powerful sectors doing the most of the teaching on campus. They're doing days of action, etc. So they have a lot of experience that could help us build the next system teaching. And they also have a lot of experience that speak to the issues of the next system. And so I think they would be an important part of the coalition and the workings of a next system coalition. Finally, I think we need to really localize it. The issues will differ from campus to campus. One big issue, I'm right now in Syracuse, New York, right? And the university is building large dormitories. There's a lot of private developers also building a lot of dormitories, right? So if I were to be organizing a next system teaching, I would want to be able to think about who those private developers are and wonder about public sector alternatives. I would want to reach out to the same building trade unions, right? The building trades who are very powerful in Albany, New York, who can get these contracts together with the private developers. What can we do to win them over, right? How do we think about the new housing in ways that don't displace the local community, but in fact, try to create communities that are not merely student-dense communities, but a very diverse community of which the students are one part of it. So that's how I see like the practical questions of everything we hold here getting worked out by starting with this teach-in process.
Thank you, Suren. And I saw in the chat, April had a question here on AI. Do you want to speak to that question, or we can just read it out loud? I can invite you to speak if you'd like, April. All right. Okay. Reorient. Okay. So April's question, here I'm going to read it verbatim. I have a number of peers using AI now in their work. Just for context, April works in part with organizing, but also in part with art. So multiple spaces. But yeah, I have a number of peers using AI now in their work. While I have been resistant, in part because of the learning curve, I'm curious how we grapple with the possibilities while also seriously considering its negative environmental impact. And I kind of want to orient this question towards organizing for the teach-ins, organizing on campus, locally and all, internationally, and all of that. So opening it up to the floor. The stack is open.
should I go first and we stack up again, or?
Yeah, you can go.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll just go. Yeah.
Okay. So when Deissy brought up the AI, I was like, oh, that's the contradiction I was talking about, and the tensions that we face today, which maybe the folk in the UDF in South Africa and the anti-apartheid coalition maybe we're not contending with. And I have the same, I should say, April, I have the same feelings towards the use of AI, and yet I also see the benefits of using AI in our work. But maybe a better or more pragmatic stance would be to use AI that's not using the capitalistic logic. So maybe switching from ChatGPT to another, not to say names or whatever, to another platform. I'm taking advice from, one of my advisors. We're like, why should we keep on, supporting XYZ? Maybe to think about it that way, but also to take Suren's words out of his mouth. I think it's also about us contending with divergent views in a very pragmatic way and bringing those voices to the table and not sort of leaving that space out. So have the spaces for having those tensions exist and contending with them. So I know a lot of professors as well are struggling with how to really include AI into their curriculum or, teaching methodologies, research, because initially the first step was to push away, but maybe that's not the proper strategy. So that's what I would say with my limited academic sort of experience.
And Suren, you can go.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take a bite at this apple too. Initially, and we're talking about a very fast-moving world, yeah, right? Initially, the concern from faculty was, oh no, the papers are going to all be written by this AI, and what am I going to do? How can I police this, right? I think there are other dimensions to AI that we need to think about. The administration see it as a viable cost-cutting tool. And so this could mean cutting workers, right, and a decrease in the quality of services. So this is something we need to think about. In addition to that, and I think there's a very pernicious dimension to it, I'll share a paper in the chat right now. And I also want to get to the energy dimension that April has mentioned, right? There's a global conversation happening about using AI tools to be able to compare campuses to one another and rate them globally, right? In other words, it's about homogenization rather than diversity, right? And so I think that the next system needs to be able to embrace the local and the particular, as opposed to putting every institution onto some sort of AI-managed global ranking. And that's something I think we can think a lot about and address practically by building, not only faculty, internal university relations, but university campus relation, university community relations, uni-muni community, right? So I think that's another dimension that's really important. We should also acknowledge that most universities have already bought in to highly energy intensive administrative systems on Amazon Web Services, on Microsoft's Azure system, et cetera, right? So this energy dimension is something that we need to be able to call for complete audit of the energy of the campus. And I think that people who are asking questions about the campus's carbon footprint are really in a place to ask these questions. But they can also ask questions about the particular AIs that are being used. For example, DeepSeek uses a lot less energy than the others, right? And so we need to think about these things as to which technology is the appropriate technology. But this isn't presently a conversation. It's it's an administrative decision made who knows where. It could be in a bar, it could be at someone's home over the phone, or two people bribing each other, who knows. So we need to open up the space and make those conversations happen publicly.
Yeah, on that note, Suren, yeah, I think that's it. It's a matter of open the conversation and make it public, because when I mentioned AI at the end of my while replying to Liza's question, I am very aware of the ethical, implications of artificial intelligence, but I'm also aware of, specific packages for social research that is being developed, also to kind of stand for certain causes. And I think, this is something that we need to get informed from. I in the last days, I enrolled to a class at the Flaxo University in South America. It's a seminar who is teaching social researchers, anthropologists, sociologists, how to ethically and responsibly use all these technologies. I'm going to start in May. So I'll be able to talk more about the topic then, but I think it's something, if we are talking about linking up, if we're talking of finding effective ways of building the next systems, I definitely think there are tools developed by AI and by many communities in the world that we could use for this purpose. And I stand by it. And I'm curious to learn how these systems work too.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It really, like Liza mentioned, it's a contradiction, a tension, in part between our values as people who want to create a better world, but also pragmatically how we actually do that. It's interesting tension. We have to wait to find out. But Suren, can ask your presentation questions if you'd like. You can, I guess, share your screen, put them on the screen.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
This might be a bit inefficient from my point of view, but
Oh, then
because
I can
I can do
type
it.
them in.
I just
Okay.
don't know where I am in my presentation.
Okay.
Let me go back to those questions. Here it is. So identify, 5 examples of the coalitions, and then I ask, am I sharing the right screen? Yeah. What can we win for the next system?
Yes.
Great. And then I ask, if we did all those things, right, would I really speak to what I promised in the presentation about building power, building community, and prefiguring the next system? Or are those examples just unrelated to these abstract concepts of power, community, next system?
All right. Again, chat open to anybody with any thoughts, wants to answer the question or pose something else. And I guess like last time, in the meantime, while people think up their answers, Liza, do you want to go ahead and share your thoughts?
I think the way I would answer this is to try and look at the strategic or tactful strategic practices that have been demonstrated in the different sort of scales and models that Suren presented. And I'm thinking when it comes to power, though, like building power from like the bottom up perspective, and sort of contending with more systematic power systems that we find ourselves in this current system. I do agree with some of the strategies you said, like practically speaking, one-on-one, and then sort of building up from that perspective. but I'm also questioning how effective we are at contending with power structures that are more structural and systematic. So let's take, for example, we want to think about food, how's the food being sourced, questions about food sovereignty. And I'm bringing this up because I know I was speaking to some like early immigrant college alumni who came to the US, and at that time when they came, they could not access, food of their choice or what they consider as food. So maybe if I was to meet someone like that and we start to think about, okay, so how do we address the fact that there's sort of some food apartheid happening on campus? So how would that then, translate to the power issues? So I think for me, building community is clear, sort of prefiguring the next system. The strategies that we discussed here are very clear. It's just on the power that I think we need to really think more about how to start to disrupt. And perhaps the way Suren put it in scales makes sense, and sort of moving from one-to-one, door-to-door to more, strategic. What are the labor sort of staff unions doing? Faculty, and so and building it like that, sort of scaffolding makes sense. But how do you give power to those peripheral marginalized communities is still something I need to think about. But great presentation, and I feel it really addressed a lot of the issues, and how to build power, community, and prefiguring the next system.
Thank you, Liza. Your point really resonated with me, actually. As a student, my university is incredibly diverse. A lot of, especially the Latino population here, but also the undocumented population here. And that poses its own specific challenges when it comes to organizing. Especially, I've noticed in the food area, like a lot of them end up working at the cafeteria, like dining halls type thing, and it just makes things a lot more complex. But Daisy, you have thoughts?
I'm so sorry, Suren. I lost my audio for 1 minute and I missed your question. Can you repeat it, please?
Okay. I asked whether the various not strategies, but projects that I identified for the next system. I'll put it back on screen. Is that okay, Gabriel?
Yep, yep. Go ahead.
Okay. Share. For example, food systems, sourcing, dining halls, community support agriculture, local co-ops, right? Whether these different projects are practical ways that relate to building power, building community, and prefiguring the next system. And so I won't respond to Lizah's comments, which I think are spot on, but this is what I asked. Like, when we think practically about different entry points for the next system, are we actually, in fact, doing these things, building power, building community, prefiguring the next system?
Can I reply to that?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I think picking up from the previous panel, I think it was Jasmine who said something like, part of building up communities initiatives and support communities initiatives means that, people need to know that they are supported by a system. like any system. If they are not supported by the state, they look up for other resources. If they are not supported by the police, they look up for other resources. I think the conversation about the new systems looking forward, it's somehow in the middle of those transitions of people looking out for other systems that are not supporting them right now. And I think this is the confluence, the convergence, speaking of the convergence, this is a convergence point, place where we should be placing ourselves to, from where we should be speaking out a specific problems. Don't assume that institutions protect people. Official institutions protect people. Why we pick up from there to think about any existence? That's kind of what I don't know. That's my first thought of your presentation and of your question, Suren.
Thank you, Deissy. And I'm looking here in the chat. CPG. Yeah, their vision for a coalition for the next system teach-ins. Right. Okay. So again, if anybody in the chat wants to, they are actually, I would ask PG to speak, but they are, I believe they said in an earlier comment that they are not in a place to at the moment. So we can move on then to Deissy. You had posed some questions at the end of your presentation.
Yes, well, my questions were more, I think in part we have replied to them, but I think maybe if we could try to talk about where do you think, where do you think next systems are? Because you know how I presented, I introduced my presentation by saying, okay, I thought the next systems were in the future, something that is not, something that we need to create collectively, right? But looking back, forward, I see that they're actually present in different parts of the world. So I don't know if Lizah and Suren have thought about this. Like, where can we find the next systems? I'm not referring necessarily to a place. I'm also not referring necessarily to a community of human beings. Yeah, why don't we try to talk about that?
Thank you, Deissy. Last time we started with Lizah, so go ahead.
I wanted to ask Suren to maybe respond because he wanted to respond after I spoke. Can Suren respond and then I'll respond to Daisy's question? I have it down.
Yeah. I think Daisy's point about not assuming that institutions are on our side is it has to be a starting point for all of this work, right? Because I think we build power in order to change institutions. And so when we identify a problem with an institution, we don't want to get caught in a chicken and egg situation where we have to change the institution in order to engage it, but we can't engage it because it's not right. So that is why I chose these particular examples as entry points. For example, the one, and this is the food system sourcing, dining halls, CSAs, and local co-ops, right? So I can remember from my first year at a university with an unfortunate name in South Africa, Rhodes University, the big thing about the dining halls with the food, not aside from the food fights, right, was that we really didn't like the food. And we had no power to change it but to make a lot of noise. But then the people who had to deal with the noise and the throwing of food were not the people who made the decisions on the campus about the food systems. So I think that, Deissy, you shouldn't shy away from not think about from thinking about the next system as not connected to a place or people or a community. In fact, we need to get that concrete, right? We need to think about who's making those decisions and who we need to get to go talk with those people, right? And when we need to do that, we have to go to the unions, right? Is one place I'm saying to start. Right? The unions may say, these are kids. We don't need to listen to them. They won't say that to me because I'm, quite far removed from being a kid these days. But they might say that about undergraduate students. But if undergraduate students went to a staff union as a union themselves, they'll have more power to engage with them and understand what are the common interests. So it's those conversations that are power building sessions that create the basis for you to engage, challenge, and change those institutions. And so you could think about, getting together a group of immigrant students about the food that is being served. You can also identify community supported agriculture or local community gardens who you want to tell the dining hall people, you need to source your food from these people. So that's how we build the next system, because the next system is here. We need to give it more visibility. We need to strengthen it. We need to activate it. And that these examples are about how we activate it. Am I taking too long, Gabriel?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Liza, yeah, because we have 4 minutes left, so or now 3 minutes, so I want to get to
Okay.
Deissy's question.
So I think for me, I envision the next system being knowledge systems that we build. And I just wanted to give a caveat, but then I'll start talking a lot in terms of, for me, the power dynamic was the tensions within like policy, right? Like, how do you contend with policies that are impacting on you right now, that the dining hall does not source culturally relevant food, and how that contends with how that gives us power. So maybe I was thinking about it and really wanting to understand the reaction from Deissy and Suren. And I thought about another example, which is I went trying to talk to students about housing. In fact, that was not my initial intention. We were talking about a coalition called Rethinking Economics, and I was wanting to get, undergrads recruited. And the meeting ended up we ended up talking about housing on campus. And housing is an issue generally, even in Burlington, Vermont, for those who know. And I felt like, how am I going to like give these undergrads some power? And the only maybe avenue was to find alliances with the local newspapers and, start to get the word out there and write. And that's how I could encourage them to get that power, that self-determination from the bottom up. So, but for me, next systems is about knowledge systems, cultural commons, what I spoke about earlier on, really amplifying those marginalized indigenous knowledges and cultural knowledges and integrating them to become, because right now they're not in mainstream. So transdisciplinarity becomes key, and, participatory action research. I think I would say that, but I wanted to just bring my point around. Currently, we have the TikTok debate, which shows me, like knowledge systems. That's where we also need to think about and building the next systems when it comes to knowledge democratization and building the next systems.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liza. I think we are out of time. Yeah, it's 3:29. Don't want to take up too much time from the closing session. But again, I want to say thank you to all our panelists. They're all wonderful, all had wonderful presentations and questions and insights. So thank you. Thank you. And thank you to the chat as well, everybody who was here